2, body of knowledge. We shall learn about reference documents, general tips on document navigation, important terms and definitions, and body of knowledge. Specified API 653 above ground storage tank inspector must have a broad knowledge in tank inspection and repair of above ground storage tanks. In a nutshell, the API 653 authorized tank inspector should know about above ground storage tank standard for material design, fabrication, erection, and inspection. API standard 650, tank repair, alteration and reconstruction 653, weld inspection, WPS, ASME section 9 and API 577, NDT ASME section 5, corrosion and damage mechanism 571, cathodic protection 651, lining 652, inspection of pressure relieving devices 576, and finally have sufficient general and safety knowledge. The API 653 examination has two sets of reference documents as study material. One set contains ASME codes, section 9 welding and section 5 non-destructive testing, and API standards 650 and 653. The other sets of reference material are recommended practices 571 damage mechanism, 575 inspection practice, 576 pressure relieving devices, 577 welding, 651 and 652 lining and cathodic protection. Most of the calculation type of question comes from the API standard and ASME codes and are in open book part of the question examination. You need not to memorize the formulas, but should know where to look for when solving the open book question. This is especially important since the search button is disabled during the exam. If you cannot find what you look for during the open book exam, look at the table of contents. Still can't find it? Look for list of tables or list of figures. They are much smaller and easier to manage. And if you can't find it, make a note of question number, flag it off, and jump to the next question. Chances are you may find it later when looking for answer to other question. Don't spend more than 1 minute on a closed book or more than 2 minutes on an open book question. If you can't find the answer or you can't, then just it's not going to help if you drag it on and you shall be short of time at the end. So just make a note and flag it off on the screen and then jump to the next question and come back later at the end or whenever you found the answer. Never spend more than 2 minutes on an open book question. Otherwise, you may be short of time answering all questions. You should have an idea how to navigate through them during open book part. When reading a code and a standard, don't immediately dive into details, get the bigger picture. Look at the structure of the codes or recommended practice and standard, the table of contents, list of figures, list of tables, how the sections are prepared. So get the overall picture. And then look at the scope, the purpose of the code, what is included, what is not included, because this can be potential exam question. This step is often overlooked, and the purpose of code and how to locate the information. We have flagged important pages of code within each summary and also brought important information in the flashcards. This information should be treated as potential exam question. And mock exams and quizzes also designed to test your knowledge, help you understand how to interpret and check if you missed something we explained before. The closed book exam questions that are coming straight from the API and ASME codes are the ones that the inspector would be using on a daily basis, and therefore you need to memorize them. These are called awareness type of question or practical questions. Don't worry, we shall supply you with enough presentation, mock exams, pictorials, flashcards, and practice questions to ensure that you have not forgotten them during the exam. You have summarized the second set of reference documents that contain the recommended practices, highlighted important information, and explained the underlying reason whenever necessary, so you understand the concepts. Around 40 to 45% of question comes from API 653 in conjunction with API 575, which is the inspection practice of the storage tank. And please note that API 650 and 653 are standards and hence are mandatory, while the rest of API documents are recommended practices, good engineering practices. So anything that is short and crisp and it's been repeated in the recommended practice or in a standard, those are the potential exam question. Closed book question mostly come from API 653 standard and RPs because this information is supposed to be used by inspectors on daily basis. For open book questions that need referring to tables, graphs, and formulas, you shall have access to both the API, RPs, and 653 code, as well as the ASME codes, but the search button is disabled. So it's always advisable to frequent them and practice and get the hack of it, how is it structured, so you can go quickly to that. We have already highlighted all these important parts, plus also we frequented to them during the mock exam and practice questions, and also mentioned that in highlights of the publication effectivity sheet as well as the flashcards. Now, API reference material, as you can see, we have explained this. You can find it from the publication effectivity sheet, includes 653, 650, 571, sections 3 and a dozen of damage mechanism, 576, 577, 575, 651, 652, ASME section 5, only articles 1, 2, 6, 7, and 23, and ASME section 9. We shall cover them within the next 9 modules, combined with flashcards and mock exams. You should understand what's the difference between a code and a standard and recommended practice. Codes are normally are scientific based, whereas recommended practices are more empirical, or they show you the trends based on the experience and engineering practices. So the codes cannot be violated, or the standards, whereas the recommended practices are advisory and it's just a recommendation, as the name suggests. The analogy would be, for example, like a WPS and a welding instruction. So the welder does not need to know about all the essential, non-essential parameters, and also the welder does not need to know about the PQR and its associated test reports. So it would be the same way as with the recommended practice here. Empirical formulas, they are not highly accurate and it's not important. For example, if you want to do a preheat, the recommended practice says that it should be 40 or 4 inch from each side of the weld. So you don't need to get an accurate or a number or picture of that, as long as it's mostly a rule of thumbs, and they are very practical. Overall, the codes are scientific based, while RPs are more experience based, and they show the trends with empirical formulas and so forth. Document navigation during open book examination. Before going to the relevant section, you need to know which document or documents you need to look at in order to find a particular topic during the open book. Therefore, you need to know what is covered in each code and recommended practice. If you are in doubt, look at the table of contents. If it doesn't help, look at the list of figures or tables for large volume codes. It shall give you an idea where you can find the topic. For smaller documents, peruse through table of contents or figures. Try reading the PDF format of documents on a desktop or laptop so your eyes and mindset gets used to them. It seems the brain works differently when you're looking at a hard copy of a document than when you peruse through soft copy of the same document. Reading soft copies of reference documents help acclimatize yourself while searching for a topic. A little practice is necessary to get it right. It's particularly useful for bigger codes such as ASME Section 5 and 9, as well as API 650. These are over between 500 to 1,000 pages. Also try to memorize the topic of the codes and RPs so you know where to look for. If you can't find the relevant section after a couple of minutes, flag it off and note the question number on a piece of paper. And the chances are that you shall find it when looking for answers for other questions. Once found, you can go back to the flagged off question and solve it within seconds. You're also advised to practice for topics in the looking for topics in the PDF format. API standard 653 and the recommended practices associated with it should not be a problem navigating, as they are much smaller compared to ASME codes and API standard 650. There is also the content list available for each RP. Please note that the reference codes and RPs provided during the open book part of the exam are not board searchable, so you should know where to find each topic. Following modules, we shall be explaining and highlighting the important topics and tables, supplemented with flashcards and mock exam. This should help you get an idea where to look for. Fortunately, the list is not exhaustive, so you should not have problem navigating through these documents. Body of knowledge. This is taken from the body of knowledge, the latest one from API, and this inspector is expected to calculate the metal loss. That doesn't mean that only this section is covered. It's the entire section of the and the entire API 653 is covered. You should also note that sometimes the question comes in US customary or SI system, and you should be able to use both systems in all the codes and recommended practices. The tables includes both US units as well as the ISO or SI metric units. In instances that the reference document is only US or SI, candidates should be prepared to respond in the unit's reference. You should know about the corrosion rates and inspection interval. That includes metal loss, corrosion rates, remaining life, remaining corrosion allowance. And that's all covered in API 653 section 4, and question can come both in closed book and open book. The formulas will always come in the closed book if you need any calculation. You should know about joint efficiencies, which is mentioned in, again, section 4, table 4.2, and type and extent of radiography. Definitely there are questions coming, so anything that mentioned in API body of knowledge, you should read it twice and you should be careful. We have highlighted all of this. The maximum field height for hydrostatic testing, you should be able to calculate based on the thickness, and you should be able to you should be familiar with calculating the weld size for shell and roof openings, and you have to refer to the figures on section 5 of API construction code and section 9. Hot tapping means when you're drilling a hole during the while this tank is in service, and that is covered in section 9 of API 653. You should be able to calculate the minimum spacing between an existing nozzle and new hot tap nozzle. Again, it's the same section, and you should be able to do the settlement evaluation at the tank bottom. This is covered in API 653, and number of settlement points, the minimum number, and the minimum spacing. And impact testing, which is in API construction code should be able to find whether a metal, particular metal, according to the figures and tables, the material group, and the working temperature, does it need an impact test or not, and also determine the value, the minimum acceptable value for the impact test. The minimum thickness, this is definitely a question coming from this section 4. As you see, the section 4 is mentioned a lot, so this section of the API 653 should be read multiple times for determining the minimum thickness, and you should be able to calculate the allowable stress, the joint efficiency, and the liquid height, and the thickness required for continuous service, and the minimum thickness for reconstructed tank shell, which is in section 8. Again, the same thing, allowable stress, design shell thickness, and hydrostatic shell thickness. And then for corroded area, you should be able to calculate the minimum, the critical length, the minimum length, the minimum pitting area, depth, and for that particular one, you can calculate the height and the joint efficiency. Based on height and joint efficiency, the minimum available thickness or remaining thickness. This is again about the pitting. Bottom plate minimum thickness. Again, you can see it in 650 construction code, as well as, but it's easier to look at 653. The inspection standards or code, the minimum thickness, remaining thickness for the next inspection interval. Replacement plates, there are figures in section 9 of 653, and lap welded patch plates, minimum thickness and belt size and allowable size of patch plate. And then on section 9, you should be able to, it only concerns the welding section of the section 9. Brazing is not covered, and you should be able to look at the WPS and see if supporting PQR is enough for that. The welding performance, welder performance qualification, what should go into it, and how the welder could be qualified. Most of the question comes from table pages 170 to 190. You should be able to know about the essential, non-essential, and supplementary essential variables, and the thickness and diameter range qualification, and you should know about the P number, P number, and F number, and A number, and all this, what they all means. Weld procedure review will only include SMAW or GMAW, and it would not with the following limitations. So it would be very simple WPS actually, and the base metal will only be P number 1. There will be no dissimilar weld metal. General welding requirements for according to API 650, 653. Non-destructive examination, ASME section 5, and it includes general requirements, the scope, responsibility, calibration, record keeping requirements. We have explained the definition of inspection and examination multiple times. Radiographic examination, you should be able to look at the report, and you should be able to understand that the minimum requirements that should go in a radiographic report, and the procedure. You should also know about liquid penetrant, about the procedure, contaminants, techniques, examination, interpretation, documentation. As you can see on MT also, you will ask the same things you should know about: interpretation, documentation, procedure, techniques. And it would only cover yoke and prod only. And about the UT, it would be only for thickness measurement, and it's a couple of pages. And you should know general non-destructive examination requirements according to API 650 and 653. So practical knowledge, you should know about the organization, certification requirements, type and definition of inspection, types of corrosion and deterioration, material and fabrication problems, welding, non-destructive examination, and all this, plus specific practical knowledge, which includes API 571. They have explained which section you should know. Say for damage mechanism, you should know terms, definition, and a dozen of popular, most frequent damage mechanisms. The very basics. And then 575, inspection practice, and 576, safety relief valve, and it's normally section 4 or section 6, inspection, testing, maintenance, weight loaded pressure test, what is a relief valve, what is a safety valve, and types of the valves like gate, globe, check, ball valves. Welding inspection and metallurgy, you should know about the welding inspection process, procedure, materials, consumables, welder qualification, non-destructive, and metallurgy and terminology and all that. And 653, this is the most important one, as we emphasize and recommend that you read it at least twice. And it also includes safe working practices, thickness, dimensional measurement, frequency of interval, next inspection interval, in the procedure, personal qualification. And the list is very exhaustive here, and calculation for evaluating thickness measurement and tank integrity, minimum thickness, use of unidentified materials for repairs and alterations, what you should do, the hydro test. You should have also understanding of the reports, records, repairs and alteration, and nameplate requirements. And then lastly, it would be cathodic protection 651, how the cathodic protection works, how the corrosion of tanks happens, and methods of cathodic protection, whether it's sacrificial anode or an impressed current, and design of cathodic protection system, and sources detection and control of interference currents, and 652, lining of above ground storage tank buttons, that there are what type of lining you should use, and surface preparation, which is an important part, and issues affecting the application of tank bottom lining. That would be the end of module 2. And then on subsequent modules, we start with NDT, and we cover all the subjects of the publication effectiveness sheet. Thank you for listening.